Hey there, this is Natalie, and this wasn't the video I was expecting to put up next because I thought it would take a really long time to create this list, which it actually did. But still, it ended up taking less time than getting the scripts for the other videos I'm working on to where I'm happy with them. So here we are with every episode of Mushoku Tensei so far, ranked from my least to most favourite. I've seen people do this with various much longer running shows like South Park and even The Simpsons, and I always thought it would be fun to do. But I'm going to start on easy mode with Mushoku Tensei, which has a mere 37 episodes right now. And that's if you include the Eris Goblin Slayer OVA and Season 2 Episode 0, which I have. I was doing a rewatch to prepare for Season 2 Cour 2, and I decided it would be fun to rank the episodes. And then as new episodes come out during the spring 2024 season, I think it will be fun to say where they drop into this list. Now, this is 100% my personal taste. In fact, only the bottom 2 episodes on this list are ones I actually have any reason to think are inferior to the others. And the rest are all episodes I think have a lot of merit, but just I've ranked them in terms of how much they impacted me or entertained me specifically. So this is very much a personal ranking rather than a technical one. I, for instance, tend to really love the big wham episodes where everything changes or big revelations are made, whereas other people may prefer the more emotional, quieter episodes or the fun slice of life stuff that focuses more on character dynamics. Mushoku Tensei excels in all of these areas, so if I've placed an episode you love lower than you'd want it to be, please just take that as my preferences rather than me thinking the episode is actually bad. Even the episodes I don't like so much are better than a lot of TV out there. You know I love this series, so just don't get salty if we don't agree. If you want to see a lot more Mushoku Tensei content, then please consider subscribing, as I have plenty of content already on the channel, including stuff for anime onlys and novel readers, and I'll be doing plenty more as we get into Season 2 Part 2. I also have to slide in a bit of the embarrassing e-begging, since I'm going through a horrendously tough and stressful time at the moment, as has been explained on my recent videos and streams, so I'm not going to go over it again here. But if you can afford it and want to help me keep going, then there is a link to my coffee in the description. People who support me are literally lifesavers at the moment, so if you want to help out a cat girl this month, please let it be me, yeah? I do have something special planned for people who've supported me, which will go out in a few days, and which I hope will serve as my humble thanks to anyone who's been able to help me get through a series of very stressful periods. But with that out of the way, let's start with my least favourite episode and go all the way up to what I consider to be the absolute peak of Mushoku Tensei. And yes, I did do this with spreadsheets and all kinds of other nerdy stuff. So in 37th place, Season 2 Episode 2, The Forest in the Dead of Night. This episode is the one where Rudeus works with his new party counter arrow and ultimately ends up saving Sarah from a dangerous tree ant. It's not a bad part of the story by any means, but because it did rush through a lot of stuff, where they were keen to wrap up this arc quickly and move to the Academy arc, it did suffer from odd pacing. It wasn't even really clear how Rudeus rescued Sarah, and a lot of interesting world building and characterization was cut from the episode. I understand why this was done, as characterization for people who wouldn't be major players long term is reasonable to leave out, and the world building aspects could be included later when they're more relevant to the current plotline. But it did make for an episode that felt like it was just moving the story forward to get to the important scenes in the next episode. It's not a big deal, but it does make it my least favourite episode. In 36th place, Season 1 Episode 18, Separate Journeys. This one I think will be more contentious, as I know a lot of people found this story of Roxy reuniting with her former party member and then her parents to be really compelling, but I just didn't enjoy it. It came immediately after the episode where Rudeus and Paul reunite, so rather than another touching family reunion episode, I was just keen for them to keep moving on with Rudeus's story. Additionally, Roxy wasn't especially important to the plot at this time, and the people she reunites with aren't characters who are going to play a big part later on. I would just rather have seen this as an OVA rather than it breaking up Rudy's story. Where we've had episodes that don't include Rudeus before and have shown what the lead female characters have been up to, it was in the form of the Eris Goblin Slayer OVA for Eris and Season 2 Episode 0 for Sylphy. So I just feel like that would have been a better way to give an episode on what Roxy was doing, rather than stall the plot with an episode that's really just characterization for her and is pretty irrelevant to the plot we were currently watching. It's a nice episode as a standalone, but I definitely came away from it thinking it was the worst episode of Season 1. In 35th place, Season 1 Episode 11, Children and Warriors. Now, this is a perfectly good episode with action, emotional consequences, and development for all of Dead End. It's just this low because, I guess with hindsight, these formative adventures, when Dead End first form, become less memorable than the things they do later. Really, from this point onwards, none of these are episodes I have any particular issues with. They're just great episodes, ranked in order of how special I see them at the current point in the series. In 34th place, Season 1 Episode 6, A Day Off in Roa. This is an episode that builds on Rudy's relationship with Eris when he first becomes her tutor, and it also gives us some great world building, including setting up things like the aphrodisiac that Luke gives to Sylphy to use on Rudeus right at the end of Season 2 Cour 1. It's a solid episode with a lot of great details. In 33rd place, Season 1 Episode 15, Slow Life in the Doldia Village. As with the last entry on the list, this is a nice episode that focuses on world building and character interactions. It's interesting and it does a lot to set up relationships that will matter later. It just isn't a big hitter when it comes to drama or plot progress, so that's why it's not ranked higher. In 32nd place, Season 2 Episode 10, These Feelings. This is another solid episode, and it's only as low as it is for being more about setting up what happens next than containing any of the big moments in the plot lines it is focused around. In this episode, Rudeus accepts his feelings for Fitz, and he discovers that she's actually a woman. But the payoff doesn't come until the next episode, so it's just down here in 32nd place for being a calm before the storm type of thing. Episodes like this make complete sense in terms of pacing, but of course when you're ranking your favourites, they do tend to place lower than the things they're leading into. In 31st place, Season 1 Episode 10, The Value of Life and the First Job. This is a very interesting episode where Rudeus learns a lot about Regerd's mentality, where he is willing to kill quite easily, and Rudeus has to consider how he's going to lead a team with someone like that in it. It's a good plotline with a lot of development for all of Dead End. I think it's just maybe less enjoyable on a rewatch when you've already seen how close Dead End become. So seeing them in a state where they don't really understand how to work together yet feels just a bit sad and frustrating, even though, of course, it was necessary for them to become the team we loved later in Season 1. In 30th place, Season 1 Episode 13, Missed Connections. This is a fun episode that introduces Elena Lee Santalhand and shows us what Roxy's been up to, and it also gets dead end on the move to Millis. But where it relies on the fact that these two groups were so close to meeting up but didn't, it's kind of going for Roxy reunion blue balls. In 29th place, Season 2, Episode 5, Ranoa University of Magic. This is the episode where Rudeus first enrolls at the university, and it serves to introduce or reintroduce many of the characters that will play a part in this arc, particularly Fitz, Sonoba and Cliff. But it's a new arc setup episode, so the most interesting things with these characters are still to come, and that's why it doesn't rank higher, even though it's a great start to the arc. In 28th place, Season 1, Episode 19, Route Selection. This is the one where Rudeus follows Hitagami's advice to find Aisha, and then, believing that Roxy's still in the palace in the Sharon Kingdom, tries to arrange to meet her, before being summoned to the palace where he'll have to deal with Pax and rescue Lilia. It's a good episode for intrigue, for Hitagami involvement, and for bringing Aisha back into the story, but it is mostly set up for what happens next. So as with the other more setup type episodes, it's in the bottom half. In 27th place, Season 2, Episode 1, The Broken-Hearted Mage. This was the first we saw of Rudeus after Eris left him, and the episode does have a strong emotional impact. However, it is there to introduce Rudy's new situation and the new people he'll be around for this short arc, so it is, once again, lower on the list than the episodes that pay off what it sets up. In 26th place, Season 1, Episode 12, The Woman with the Demon Eyes. This episode has a lot of important stuff in it, from a growing sense of what Hitagami operates like, through to introducing both the concept of demon eyes and Kishirika Kishirisu, both of which will remain relevant throughout the story as features of this world. It also has some important character development between Eris and Rudeus, and is all in all a great episode. Just not as great to me as the ones I've put higher. We're really now in the part of the list where I could probably be persuaded to rearrange just about anything by a few places, as the quality of even the stuff I've placed this low in the list is still really high. In 25th place, Season 2, Episode 4, Letter of Invitation. This is the episode that transitions from the arc with Sarah into the university arc, and sees Elena Lise finally meet up with Rudeus. It's one of the most light-hearted episodes, and has some great comedic moments involving Rudeus's reactions to Elena Lise and Soldat. In 24th, Season 1, Episode 20, The Birth of My Little Sister, the Maid. This is the episode where Rudeus meets Sonoba, escapes from Pax, and ultimately says goodbye, for now at least, to Lilia and Aisha, who are going back to join with Paul. It's got some very funny moments involving Sonoba, though we don't yet realise how much of a friend to Rudy he will end up becoming. And the scenes with Aisha show off just how smart and cheeky she's become, meaning she became a character people will definitely be looking forward to seeing come back in the future. I might have ranked this one higher if it wasn't for the fact that as a novel reader, I knew what was coming next and was very impatient to get to it. As I said, this list is very much not impartial. In 23rd, Season 2, Episode 7, The Kidnapping and Confinement of Beast Girls. This is the episode where Rudeus and Fitz get the Beast Girl delinquents, Lilia and Persena, to submit, which results in them becoming Rudeus's subordinates for the rest of their time at the school. I personally find this episode hilarious, and I love Lilia and Persena, as well as the way we see Fitz's more devious side come out in places here, which I just find cute. I know a lot of people were offended by this episode, but with the greater context of just how much of a menace the Beast Girls were from the novels, and the fact it's just funny, I don't really care. It's a great episode. In 22nd, Season 1, Episode 14, No Such Thing as a Free Lunch. This is the one where Rudy is imprisoned naked at the Beast Tribe village. This episode is really cool, and it does a lot to introduce Gisu into the story, a character we will be seeing more of in Season 2 Part 2. It does a lot in terms of world building too, and is just generally a very solid episode, with humour, action, and a lot of interesting details that help flesh out things like how the Beast Tribes think, and the matter of human trafficking in this setting. In 21st, Season 2 Episode 0, Guardian Fits. This episode effectively serves as an OVA, even though it was aired in the normal slot as the start of Season 2. It's an important episode in terms of explaining what happened to Sylphy and why she's now pretending to be a man and working for Ariel, and I think it was well executed in terms of achieving that. However, I couldn't really put this episode higher, as it does skip an awful lot of the backstory to Ariel's group being at the university. I can see why this was done, given Ariel herself won't be a major character who needs a lot of backstory until a later arc, and spending more than one episode on this would probably frustrate people who just want to get to the continuation of Rudy's story. But we never really get the full impression of the danger Ariel and her friends are in once she decides to actually enter the running to become queen, or of how she established herself at the academy before Rudeus arrived. In 20th, Season 2 Episode 8, The Fiancé of Despair. This episode is one a lot of people felt should have been two separate episodes, with one focusing on Elena, Lise and Cliff getting together, and the other on the Beast Race mating season and Baddie Gaddy's duel with Rudeus. I can kind of see this, but in all honesty, I don't really feel like anything important was cut in terms of the plot or characterization. A few more lines of dialogue from Baddie Gaddy around the Dragon God may have been interesting to see, but since I felt like the relationship between Cliff and Elena Lise is intentionally fast-moving and surprising, which tells us something about both of them, I don't think making it seem less so by spending a whole episode on it would have improved it. I also love that a certain blue-haired character showed up and was noticed, because this basically confirms that a certain other character's story from during this period will be included in the anime, possibly as an OVA or something similar to Episode 0. In 19th, Season 1 Episode 3, A Friend. We go all the way back here to the episode where Rudeus first meets Sylphy. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this episode that characterises Paul a lot, as well as showing Rudeus and Sylphy grow as their friendship does, including Rudeus learning some important lessons. It makes us see why Rudeus is so attached to Sylphy, and her to him, as their first real friends, but also why the codependency they're showing concerns Paul. This makes everything that happens next, and how much more independent Sylphy is when we next see her, make a lot of sense. Next up in 18th place, Season 1 Episode 7, What Lies Beyond Effort. This is also a Season 1 Core 1 episode that focuses on the development of the relationship between Rudeus and one of the main girls, showing Rudeus working with Eris's dance teacher to help ensure her high-profile, bougie 10th birthday party doesn't end up as an embarrassment to her. It's a nice episode that makes everything seem like it's going pretty well, and Rudy and Eris are learning how to best help each other. So it's a good, full sense of security part of the story, right ahead of Turning Point 1. And in 17th, Season 1 Episode 9, A Chance Encounter. And this is the episode that came immediately after Turning Point 1. And so naturally, it was one that was fascinating to see, with Rudy and Eris thrown into an entirely new situation, Hitagami suddenly being a factor in Rudy's life, and of course the introduction of Regerd. We'd only heard warnings about the Spurred previously from Roxy, but as Rudy isn't affected by the curse on them that causes people to hate them due to him being from another world, it's easier for him to take Hitagami's advice and to help and trust Regerd than it is for Eris. We see Eris actually afraid and vulnerable, but willing to trust Rudeus's judgment, which not only builds on the previous development of her relationship with Rudy, but also shows us just how unprecedented and terrifying this unexpected new paradigm for the story actually is, and how survival is now going to be the priority for a while. In 16th, Season 1, Episode 5, A Young Lady and Violence. This is the episode where Eris is first introduced, completing the introductions of all three main girls. However, since Eris will be the one present for the next arc, and for the two upcoming turning points, it makes sense that she's also the one that's going to have the most difficult starting point for Rudeus to get past. This episode shows us that Eris isn't just a tsundere, but that Rudeus will really have to consider his approach to things to be able to achieve his current goals. It throws Rudeus into a new situation and introduces Sauros, who was a character that was very entertaining, despite not appearing for very long, as well as Philip, who's an interesting contrast to Paul, as a grey rat father who is very much into the political side of things that Paul wanted nothing to do with. Time moves very quickly during Rudeus's childhood years, and so a lot of things happen in these Season 1 Core 1 episodes. It's actually impressive to consider that this is only Episode 5, and so much has already occurred without any of it really feeling rushed. In 15th, Season 1, Episode 24, or the OVA, Eris the Goblin Slayer. Now, this is one of the only times I think I've seen a change from the light novel that, rather than being negative or just neutral, was actually very good, and that is that Rudeus was included in the story. Showing him in the OVA following Eris, and thereby giving us both some nice characterization for him and also some good world building in terms of the political divisions in Milis around pro and anti-demon race factions, was a great choice. The light novel version of this story didn't feature Rudeus, as he was off doing something else at the time, which tied into a storyline that was dropped in the anime, and I explain all of this fully in my video specifically about the OVA. But using the fact he was free for the anime version to have him involved here was a great choice. This OVA also introduced Cliff, who we saw become a regular character in Season 2 Part 1, and it was an interesting episode in terms of Eris's development. We see her fighting alone for the first time since she joined Dead End, and also her lack of hesitance to kill people in order to protect a child, showing both Rudeus' influence on her and her pragmatism about what can happen in battle. Eris is unfazed, even though she's never killed anyone before, which is an interesting contrast to Rudy, who remains a pacifist and takes the idea of killing someone in combat extremely seriously. The stylized opening sequence that gives Cliff's backstory was really cool, and just in general, this was a fantastic episode to have during the break between Season 1 and the announcement that Season 2 was coming. In 14th place, Season 2 Episode 6, I Don't Want to Die. This is the episode where Rudeus and Zenoba go to the slave market and find Julie. It was one of the most controversial episodes, though I have talked about that aspect of things at length in my Season 2 Part 1 review video, so I'm not really interested in talking about the slavery thing again. The reason I rank this episode relatively highly is the emotional impact of Rudeus's first encounter with Julie, where he questions whether she wants to live. Not only does this show his empathy for someone who's given up, connecting to both his depression at the start of this season and to his past life, but it also leads to a positive outcome as Julie resolves that she doesn't want to die, and they have a starting point for her to join the group. Julie may not be the most important character to the plot, but she's certainly an enjoyable one to have around, and seeing her go from this dark moment to being happy at the university, drinking beer with Baddy Gaddy, is pretty great. This was also a nice episode in building the chemistry between Rudy and Fitz, which is obviously pretty important to the main plot of this arc. In 13th place, Season 1, Episode 4, Emergency Family Meeting. This is the episode where Rudeus persuades Zenith to let Lilia and the unborn Aisha stay after Paul admits he's the father of Lilia's baby. This scenario is surprising and interesting the first time you see it, but it's also one that you can look back on when you know more about the story and consider the actual effect it ended up having on characters like Aisha. It also gives us a lot of characterization for Zenith, which is needed here early on in the story, because she's then absent from the story for the longest of any of Paul's immediate family. In 12th place, Season 1, Episode 23, Wake Up and Take a Step. This was the final episode of Season 1, and it had the difficult job of wrapping things up in a satisfying way while still showing the impact of Eris leaving on Rudeus, ready for his depressed state in Season 2 to make sense. I feel like they achieved this by playing up his motivation to find Zenith, which allowed us to see that he was going to have a reason to move forward into a new arc, but that he was also doing this in spite of his pain over Eris, rather than because he was over it. We also got to see some of Eris's perspective as we saw her travelling with Ghislaine, and also the important information Roxy has from Kishirika about Zenith. So we know not only that Rudeus is wrong in thinking that Eris has abandoned him because of his sexual performance, but also that his search for Zenith is likely to be unnecessary. This makes his ending to the season have a depressing irony to it. It's also an episode that reflects more on Rudeus's past life than anything we've really seen since episode 1, which also helps to underline his mental state. In 11th, Season 2, Episode 12, I Want to Tell You. And this is the final episode of Season 2, Part 2, which basically shows the end to the problems that began in the last episode on my list. This is where Sylphy and Rudeus finally do the deed, and the cour ends with Rudy agreeing to work with Ariel and proposing marriage to Sylphy. This was a great ending to this storyline and included some fantastic moments, like Rudeus's relief when he realises Sylphy hadn't left him in the morning. The only reason it isn't higher is because I felt like the real payoff scene to this whole story was in the preceding episode where Sylphy finally reveals who she is, and which I have put in the top 10. And now into the top 10 we arrive with, in 10th place, Season 2, Episode 3, Abrupt Approach. Sticking with the ED arc for one more entry on the rankings, this was the episode where Rudeus has his badly fated date with Sarah, he bonds with Soldat, and realises the full extent of the physical effects of his mental state when he visits the local red light district, and nothing the accommodating escort, Elise, who he chooses, tries to do, can get a response out of old Mr. Floppy. His confrontation with Sarah at the end, when she overhears his drunken ranting about her, is painful to watch. Yet there is a hint of hope here, for Rudeus at least, as he agrees to travel with Soldat's party and leave the town. This arc was sped through fairly quickly, but I think this climactic episode to it really captured what it needed to. I did miss seeing Sarah's point of view after these events, which are a chapter in the light novel, but the anime doesn't tend to show these kinds of parts if they're not essential to following Rudeus's story, so I do understand it. If you want to know what's in it though, I do have a video reading out the Sarah POV part. In 9th place, Season 1, Episode 2, Teacher. So we're going all the way back now to the very second episode, and here we see Rudeus training with Roxy and Paul, and the huge impact Roxy has on him by helping him venture outside of home for the first time. This episode is huge in terms of how relevant everything in it will seem later on, and it always surprises me to look back on these early episodes and consider just how much happens in each one. It's strange to think that Roxy and Sylphy's relationships with child Rudeus were both established in more or less one episode each, when such a good job was done of characterising these people. And all this while also exploring other things important to the series, like the magic system, and while injecting constant world-building elements. It's really easy to see why this series hooked people so quickly. Now, in 8th and 7th place, I'm going to do these two episodes together, because I kind of see it as a two-parter, where neither part is better than the other, and I just kind of want to rank them as a single thing. We have Season 1 Episode 16, Family Squabble, and Season 1 Episode 17, Reunion. This pair of episodes shows Rudy first encountering Paul after his long journey, in admittedly funny circumstances, as he suspects Paul and his party of being kidnappers, and he ends up trying to take them out with panties on his face, Shimonetta style. The initial conversation between Rudy and Paul sees Rudy trying to brag about his adventures through the world and how well he protected Eris. At this point, Rudy believes only he and Eris, and possibly Ghislaine, had been displaced, having missed the posts that Paul put up at the guilds around the world for various reasons. He also believes Paul will be impressed that he's become a strong adventurer, he's had fun, and he's taken good care of a woman. But of course, Paul is viewing all of this with the knowledge of the full extent of the mass teleportation incident. Neither of them is coming to this conversation with the other's knowledge, so Rudy's exaggerations and brags about his hardships sound incredibly tone-deaf to Paul, and they fight. This naturally causes a big upset to Rudy, but Gisu comes in to successfully grease the wheels of their reconciliation, and this sequence ends up in a very honest conversation between Rudy and the man he now finally sees very much as his real father. It's gripping, it's got a lot of layers, and it also feels like a climactic moment in the long journey Rudy has been on since the mass teleportation incident occurs, where he has finally got back to someone he belongs with, but has also found out the true horror of what that incident meant to the rest of the world. It's great television, and that's why this pair of episodes firmly belong in the top 10. Now for 6th place, Season 1 Episode 22, Dreams and Reality. I want to have your kittens, nya. Yeah, this is the episode where Rudeus and Eris finally make it back to Eris's original home after Regerd has parted ways with them and they've been sufficiently terrified by Orsted. We see the wasteland that's left behind, and Eris learns for sure that her parents and Sauros are gone, and that her position now will be precarious. Ghislaine is also finally reunited with Eris and Rudy after her own journey, which was never shown in the anime, but which I do have a video explaining if you are interested. Still, even all of this doesn't amount to the most important part of the episode. Rudeus and Eris consummate their relationship, and then Eris makes the decision that she isn't strong enough yet to be a proper partner to Rudeus. She renounces her noble family name, cuts off her hair, and leaves Rudeus with a badly worded note. Her communication skills have been established as bad, especially in writing, and her admiration of Rudy means she won't for a moment think he'll take her leaving as an outright rejection. But she doesn't know who Rudy used to be, and has no idea how much pain her brief note is going to cause him. It's a great episode, partly for its impact, and partly for giving us the culmination of the whole journey Dead End have been on. Rudy's final goal was to bring Eris home, and in this episode he achieves it, only to find the devastation others like Paul, and even Eris herself, already expected. It's just great, even if it is a bit bleak. And so we go into the top 5. In 5th place, Season 2, Episode 11, To You. This is the episode where Sylphy reveals her identity to Rudeus after a plan she cooked up with Ariel to have them caught in a storm during a quest in a forest. I just think this episode is really beautiful. I feel like it really brings a climax to the Rudy and Fitz situation just so nicely. I think a lot of people took the Fitz thing as Rudeus being an absolute idiot to an unbelievable degree and found that frustrating. But my understanding of it is that I think he actually always subconsciously knew who Fitz was. He just wasn't ready to let himself think about that yet. There are so many things, like the wand Fitz uses, her talking about her master, her being the only other person who can use voiceless magic and so on, that Rudeus, who we know to be fairly deductive about things, normally would have jumped on and figured out. If the author had wanted Rudeus to be genuinely unknowing and fooled by Fitz's persona completely, I think he would have done things differently and not had all of these signals that Rudeus would normally have easily noticed. But instead he puts these strong clues for Rudy in, but has him ignore all the hints because emotionally it's easier for him at this point in life to imagine he just has a new friend who's a guy. Of course, as he then starts to have romantic feelings for the guy he's letting himself believe Fitz is, he starts to actually question things. And similarly, Sylphy's friends are tired of her not taking action, due to her own fear that Rudeus has forgotten her. And so everything comes to a head, and both characters end up getting what they truly want. It's a really moving payoff to the whole plotline, and I'll admit I did shed some little mewy tears. But in 4th place, it's Season 1, Episode 1, Jobless Reincarnation. Yes, it's the very first episode. Mushoku Tensei is a series that really does start strong, and there are things in this episode that will be hugely important later on. For instance, we even see Nanahoshi here. It establishes what kind of pitiable life Rudeus had been living and why a second chance would be so meaningful to someone like him. But also, it shows us a lot of the flaws that he's bringing over from his old life. It introduces the setting and the Grey Rat family in a way that feels natural and human, and immediately makes you want to know more about everything in this new world. For me, I normally don't enjoy very early parts of a story all that much on a rewatch or reread. I want to get ahead to the parts of the story where all the characters I like know each other and more complicated things are going on. But Mushoku Tensei's first episode is still really entertaining to me, even now that I've read the whole series, and anime-wise, we're about to get into the second cour of Season 2. This is partly because it's just a very strong opening to a series, but also because of just how relevant everything in it stays, allowing you to get more and more from it the further along in the story that you are. And so, we finally come to my top 3. In 3rd, Season 2, Episode 9, The White Mask. Well, I did say right at the start that my favourite episodes tend to be the wham episodes, where something really important is revealed or everything changes forever. And this Season 2 episode, where Rudeus meets Nanahoshi, is definitely one of those. Not only is it a genuinely fascinating episode, from Rudeus's panic attack on seeing the masked girl, who was present at the most terrifying moment of his life again, through to the revelations about Nanahoshi also being an isekai Japanese person, but it also comes at such an unexpected time, much like the Turning Point episodes. The focus of the arc so far has been the relationship with Fitz, and Rudy making friends, and ultimately trying to get over his issues around Eris. Very little has been brought to the forefront of the story at this time around things like why Rudeus is even here, or to Orsted, or to Hitagami. We, like Rudeus, aren't expecting anything dramatic relating to that to come up during this period, where Rudeus feels like he's safe and working more on things like building relationships. And then suddenly, Fitz introduces him to this girl, just to help him with his research into the mass teleportation incident. But it's the masked companion of the dragon god, who then proceeds to talk to him in Japanese and tell him a lot of things he didn't know. I not only love this episode for just being a part of the story I think is really interesting, but also because the adaptation is so good. The way they handled the language shift was great, and some of the little details in the episode that serve as foreshadowing to people who've read the light novels and will do to anime-only audiences later on were really fun to see. Another interesting thing about this episode is that Fitz here basically learns that Rudeus is from another world. Fitz is Sylphy, and she's known Rudeus and his family since she was a little kid. She knows where he comes from. But here he's talking in a language she's never heard before, and he explains this as, "She just comes from the same place as me." I always think it's interesting that in isekai stories, we tend to think it will be a big deal for the protagonist to reveal that they're from another world, or that they have memories of a past life. But actually, in settings like this, where magic and long-lived races and so on are commonplace, normally these sorts of things actually aren't that shocking to people when they do find out, and it's not usually a big plot point. I just think that's kind of cool. As well as all the major stuff, this episode also finds time to keep progressing the Rudeus and Fitz romance storyline, with Fitz shown as being a little jealous about Nanahoshi. It's my favourite episode of Season 2, Cour 1 by far, and so, of course, we only have 2 left, and you'll probably know what they're going to be, but at number 2, we have Season 1, Episode 8, Turning Point 1. This episode completely changed the paradigm of the show, from it being an interesting story about a guy with a lot of baggage forming new relationships and learning things in a new world, to something way more than that. The human drama now suddenly gives way to survival, and the mysteries start to rack up. It is the very definition of a wham episode, but it also kind of teaches us, as readers or viewers, that this is going to be the way the story works. It's called Turning Point 1, not just Turning Point. The suggestion there is that there will be more massive events like these, which of course there will be. I've made a video about all of the turning points and what turning points actually mean in world, and I don't want to spoil anything in this video, so check that one out if you're curious and don't mind spoilers. The episode introduces a whole lot of interesting concepts, and it foreshadows many things. We see powerful characters who'll come up later in the story begin to notice the anomaly in the sky. Aramanfi is sent by Perugius, who we haven't even seen yet in the story properly, to investigate it. Hitagami can now see Rudeus and will start to interact with him. And this all just seemed like it was going to be a nice birthday party episode at the start. It's brilliant and I love it. But what I love even more is number 1 on my ranking. Season 1, Episode 21, Turning Point 2. The way this episode starts with talking about unexpected death is very similar to how the chapter started in the novels. It makes you feel anxious that maybe Regerd is going to die. It's only as the story goes on that we see that Rudeus is talking about himself here. And we've all seen isekai. We might think, well, this is still early in the story, so obviously he's not going to actually die. But when Subaru or Kazuma dies, there's another power in their world that brings them back. That's surely what's going to happen here. Hitagami will give him another go, right? But no, Itagami actually isn't the entity that brought Rudeus to this world and doesn't have the power to resurrect him. Rudeus survives only because Nanahoshi suggests to Orsted that he might be a useful person to keep alive. We don't find out why she thinks this until the episode I just talked about, The White Mask, but we do know that Rudy's survival is basically by the grace of the dragon god, not the god he's been talking to. This isn't a story where death can be reversed, and we now also know that an extremely powerful person has an interest in Rudeus. We also see just how powerful Orsted is. Until now, both we, Eris and Rudeus, had seen Regerd as pretty much unbeatable, but now we see what kind of strength actually exists in this world. A Ghislaine or a Regerd can keep them safe in most situations, but not this one. It opens up how both the characters and we as an audience see the scale in this world, and it makes us wonder, just why is someone like this interested in someone like Rudeus, who at this point really is just a talented teenage adventurer in most people's eyes? For me, this episode opens up the story and poses so many interesting mysteries that it even surpasses Turning Point 1 in terms of how much it changes and how we and Rudeus view things in this setting. And that's why it is, for now, my number one. So, we've reached the end of this journey, but of course we're getting a whole new season of brand new episodes very soon. Let me know in the comments what your favourite episode is, and subscribe if you want to see more Mushoku Tensei content as we go through Season 2 Part 2. Thank you as always to the people who've supported me on Patreon and Ko-fi, and as I said at the start of the video, I do have something special planned for you guys, and support is something I very badly need right now. I would also like to do a couple of special shout outs though. So I want to first of all say happy birthday to Balsamon, who is someone who has been a friend of the channel for a long time and who I very much hope had a wonderful birthday. I also want to say happy birthday to Apollo of the East, but it is belated because the video took a long time to make. I hope you had a great day when it was your birthday and are having a great day today too. And that's everything. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon as we get into a whole new season of what will hopefully be great anime.